here on the floor asking that Congress go to court to reclaim congressional powers? I ask my friend.
As you said, Representative Woodall, I'm an American first and a Republican second. And any president who usurps the Constitution, I would call them to task.
I confess to you, I went on the Government Oversight Committee this cycle. The Government Oversight Committee, as all my colleagues know, is responsible for doing all of the oversight over the executive branch, and I did it because I was certain Mitt Romney was going to win, and I said for far too long, power has been leaving the people's hands on Capitol Hill, gravitating down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, and we in a Republican House will be able to do oversight over a Republican president and show the American people it is not about Republicans and Democrats, it's about Article I and Article II, and following the process, following the law, following the Constitution, it matters. It doesn't matter when times are good, it matters when things get dicey, when you begin to lose those freedoms little by little. I want to ask my friend from South Carolina, because we went through this with recess appointments, whether or not there was the ability for the President to appoint folks of his choosing to various positions around the city. And what I read that D.C. court opinion to say is what President Obama has done is absolutely outrageous. It cannot possibly stand. But what Congress allowed President Bush to do, and President Clinton to do, and President Bush before him to do, and President Reagan before him to do, that was also unconstitutional, and Congress has to stand up for the powers the Constitution entrusted in us. Is that your understanding as well?
Representative Woodall, that's exactly what this resolution is intended to do. It's intended for Congress to take action to enforce the Constitution. Representative Woodall, do you hear from your constituents back home when you're speaking to them that the President is breaking the law? Why don't you do something about that? You know, I do that all the time, and I think that's the result of the erosion of Congress's power, exactly what you're talking about.
We should absolutely have arguments on this floor about how much money should be spent on this program versus that program, whether or not we should authorize a new issue or do away with an old issue. Those are those things that divide us. But we should be united, Republican, Democrat, House, and Senate, over these constitutional issues of where does the people's power reside. Because if leaders like you, in the absence of Senator Byrd from West Virginia, in the absence of Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York, in the absence of some of those greats who formerly preserved the people's power, I don't know how it gets preserved. I'm certain that you face slings and arrows from folks thinking this is some sort of partisan stunt. You just don't like this president. You just have sour grapes over the last election. I've gotten to know you well over your very short time in Congress. It is so valuable to me that you put your responsibilities as an American first far above your responsibilities as a Republican, and that despite those slings and arrows, the Constitution comes first. It may not seem like we need the Constitution to protect us each and every day, but when we wake up and realize it's not there, it's going to be too late. I hope this is something that spreads in a bipartisan way and in a bicameral way. We have preserved this republic, this greatest form of government the world has ever known, only because folks have stood up when others did not see that necessity. We need this. There is the necessity today, and I'm grateful to you for your leadership.
Thank you, my friend. I yield 5 minutes to my friend from Florida, Mr. Yoho.
I thank my good friend from South Carolina, Mr. Rice, for bringing this resolution forward and for his leadership. This is a very important issue, not only today, but as Mr. Woodall pointed out here, but also for the future of our nation, a constitutional republic, as you so eloquently put out. And in Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution specifically requires, and I want to read this, that the President take care that laws be faithfully executed. Let me read that again. The President to take care that laws be faithfully executed. This does not allow the President to enforce the laws he likes and ignores the laws he doesn't, This clause compels the President to ensure that all agencies within his executive branch are carrying out the laws created by Congress, the people's arm of government. The current administration undermines this body on a near daily basis, and if it is allowed to continue to do so, as you pointed out, the balance of power will no longer exist. In fact, it's rapidly slipping away to one side of the balance scales, and it is our duty as representatives of the American people to speak out about this, and if not us, who? And if not now, when? The delay of the employer mandate, the extension of the substandard insurance policies, and the grant of the deferred removal action of certain illegal immigrants are just but a few examples of the executive attempting to legislate without Congress. Luckily, the framers instituted a system of checks and balances. This Congress has no choice but to turn to the courts, and I offer my strong support for Congressman Rice's stop amendment or resolution, H.R. 442, which will enable the House to bring a civil action against the executive branch and allow future legislators to hold the executive branch accountable. And I think this is the crux of this, and this is the important part of this, because it's for all future presidents. And again, we have to stand up and start defending our Constitution. This administration, like others before it, has no problem creating mandates for the American people, but cannot seem to follow the most important mandate of our nation, the Constitution. And if you look at this simple little book, it's not an epic in volume. You can see it. It's very thin, but yet it's an epic in ideology of what free men and free women can do, and they're held accountable with their government by this little red book. The importance of this issue cannot be overstated. We must address this now so that all future presidents will know that they must abide by the Constitution. No president, past or present, Democrat or Republican, should ever be exempt from the duties laid out by our founding fathers. That's why I support Congressman Rice's stop resolution, H.R. 442, and I urge all my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, to support this resolution for America and for our Constitution. And I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yoho. I yield so much time as he shall utilize to my friend from Florida, Mr. DeSantis.
Well, I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. You know, when we left in December to go back to our districts for the Christmas weekend, and I got home, I thought, okay, the president's going to do something with Obamacare as we get close to Christmas. You just know, anytime you come up on a holiday, some news gets put out. July 3rd, leading in the 4th of July, was the employer mandate delay. We had the grandfather stunt was pulled leading into Thanksgiving. And sure enough, December 19th, the Obama administration grants a, quote, hardship exemption from the individual mandate tax penalty to those who've seen their plans canceled due to Obamacare. Now, look, I don't think any of those plans should have been canceled. I offered a bill here, and the House passed something similar to essentially grandfather in those plans. Federal government shouldn't be forcing people out of plans that they like. And so certainly things needed to be due there. But understand how unfair this is. If you had insurance and your policy's canceled, they're saying that, okay, and then the Obamacare replacements are not affordable for you, they're saying, okay, you're fine, no penalty for you. But if you're somebody who couldn't have afforded insurance the prior year, and now you're thrust in, told you're forced to go into these Obamacare exchanges, you still have to pay the tax, even though you may have been worse off than some of those other folks. Or if you're somebody that had employer coverage last year, and now you're maybe going out on your own and you need to buy individual insurance, if you end up in the exchanges and you don't find those affordable to you, you don't get the same relief. So this, when you're talking about arbitrary delays like this, it's inherently unfair. Now, I'll give the administration some credit. Unlike some of the other delays, there is actually a provision in Obamacare that says people can qualify for a hardship exemption from the individual mandate. The problem is that in this instance, it's Obamacare itself that constitutes the hardship. So because Obamacare is implemented, these people are suffering a hardship, so therefore they are exempt from the statute. And so to me, I think that's an abuse of what the statute is supposed to do. Certainly, it begs the question, could you simply delay or grant a suspension of all of these provisions of Obamacare? And it's interesting because I was reading in the Weekly Standard publication, there's one of the reporters was asking members of the Senate whether the President, where are their limits? What's the principal justification for his conduct? And so the reporter asked one senator, how do you determine if the President couldn't do something, that it does exceed his authority? Are there any parts of the law that the President does not have the authority to delay or suspend? The senator's response, Democratic senator, I don't know. I'm not a scholar on that. Well, reporter went to another Democratic senator, said, are there any delays the President would not have the authority to make? I mean, could the President potentially suspend the entire law if he wanted to? Answer, I can't answer a hypothetical. Reporter asked again, so you can't say if there are any parts of the law he could not delay unilaterally? The senator says, I can't answer a hypothetical. And finally, another senator told the reporter he doesn't know of any legal impediment preventing the executive branch from delaying the employer or individual mandates. And then when asked, couldn't a future president just simply come in and suspend the entire law? And that senator simply said, I don't want to speculate what a future president might do. And so I think those answers, when senators in the President's own party cannot offer any principled justification for the President's conduct that would exclude the potential of a President simply delaying all provisions of the law, you know that you're not in the realm of faithful execution of the law. And I think it's a challenge. We've talked about it in this chamber in hours like this. We've had hearings in the Judiciary Committee with experts, even liberal constitutional law experts, saying that this conduct goes beyond what the Founding Fathers intended and what the Constitution envisions. I would like to see somebody offer a principled justification for the President picking and choosing which parts of the law should be enforced and should not be enforced, should be delayed, should be suspended, or should be ignored. And it's interesting because when you go back and look at the Founding Fathers when they created the Constitution, when they created the Congress, when they created the executive, at the convention, James Wilson from Pennsylvania, he was the one who moved to create a president consisting of a single person, and that caused silence in the convention hall because they had just rebelled against Britain, and although you needed some type of executive power, there were some who were a little bit taken aback that you would even have a single president, even in a constitutional system. Some of the people said at the time, you can't really have a strong president and have a republic. So this was a huge issue for the Founding Fathers. Clearly, it would not have been acceptable to stand up at the Constitutional Convention and say, yeah, the President's going to have the authority and the duty to enforce the laws, but if there are laws he doesn't like, he'll be able to delay provisions or ignore provisions as he sees fit, as long as it's consistent with his overall purpose or political agenda. That would not have been acceptable to anybody at the time. I mean, can you imagine if when John Adams succeeded George Washington, that he just started delaying provisions related to, say, the Bank of the United States or the Jay Treaty? Imagine when Jefferson came in. He ran against the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, some of those were just allowed to expire, but they went and they repealed a core portion of the Alien and Sedition Acts. They didn't just ignore it. The provisions that expired, and then they repealed the provisions that were still in effect. And that's the way it's supposed to be done. They would have never allowed John Adams or Jefferson to come in and just willy-nilly start enforcing what they wanted to and not enforce what they don't want to. And so part of the frustration of this is, Congress is supposed to stand up for its authority. And I think the House people here realize that this is not proper constitutional government, what the President's doing. But the U.S. Senate, they are just totally out to lunch on this. They are not interested in safeguarding their institutional prerogatives because they're putting their political interests ahead of the legislative body's authority. And that really runs contrary to how the founders envisioned the separation of powers and checks and balances working. Madison in Federalist 51 said, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." And what he meant by that is, yeah, you have separate powers. You have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial power, but just because you separate them doesn't mean that individual liberty is going to be secure. So you've got to give each branch the ability to check the other branches. And they were sure that they knew people would have different partisan allegiances and all that, but they were pretty sure that each branch would have the wherewithal and would want to defend its own prerogatives. And so in this instance, I think what you don't have is a Senate that's willing to join with the House, use the power of the purse, use the appointment power, advise and consent, all the powers that we have, use those until the President starts conforming with the law. But we're not there yet. And so this idea of trying to bring this in front of courts, we shouldn't have to do that. We should be able to defend our own turf. But you know, it's frustrating because we don't have a lot of other options at this point. And so I think that my colleague from South Carolina, you know, I give him credit for thinking of what can we actually do that could potentially be successful. And so I'm hoping that this move will be successful. But I think going forward, and this has been a problem before this President, and he's not the only one who's pulled stunts like this, although I think he's gone beyond what any previous President has done. Ultimately, people in this body and in the other chamber have got to get serious about defending our constitutional responsibility. That means holding presidents accountable who are not in accordance with Article 2, Section 3, the Take Care Clause, but it also means not delegating so much legislative authority to these bureaucracies when they end up essentially legislating and those rules are imposed on the public without Congress saying anything at all about it. And so ultimately, the courts cannot save us if we aren't willing to save ourselves and protect the authority that the Constitution grants us and that we are supposed to exercise on behalf of the people that we represent. We are, especially in this House, you know, we're the people's House. The President gets elected too, but we are the closest to the people, and I think we got to do a better job of this going forward. So I would just tell my friend from South Carolina, you know, thank you for doing this. I know you've signed on. I have a resolution just to say that the House doesn't approve of this conduct, because I fear if we don't do anything, then we're basically setting a precedent where this is going to be unquestioned going forward. And so I think as much as we can do, even if we're not successful, at least we're showing people that we think this is a contested practice and we're not willing to allow this to become something that is accepted for future presidents, Republican or Democrat. And so with that, I will yield back to the gentleman from South Carolina.
I thank my friend from Florida. The separation of powers is fundamental to our form of government. The Congress enacts the laws, the President enforces the laws. One individual who can both make the law and enforce it is more a monarch than a president. Without the separation of powers, our form of government crumbles. As earlier speaker said, the erosion of the separation of powers didn't start with President Obama, but it is certainly accelerated. At home, I'm asked all the time, the President is breaking the law, why don't you do something about it? This resolution is an attempt to do exactly that. Nobody would argue that the President has no discretion in enforcing the law. Clearly, he does. But in these 4 instances, he's clearly overstepped that discretion. I fall back to say, what would we say if the President has the power to waive these things, the employer mandate, the penalty under the employer mandate? That's waiver of a tax. What would we say if the next president waived the capital gains tax or waived the maximum bracket on the income tax or waived the income tax for his friends. Clearly that is beyond the discretion of the president. Clearly President Obama has gone beyond his discretion, and Congress needs to enforce the Constitution. We have 44 co-sponsors to our bill so far, but we need the help of the American people. We need you to talk to your representatives. If you need more information about our resolution or what you can do, please go to my website at www.rice.house.gov. Thank you for your concern. Thank you for viewing. Let's protect our democracy. I yield back the balance of my time.
We remind the members to address their remarks to the chair and not to the viewing audience. And under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. During our special order hour, we want to talk specifically about the need for unemployment insurance, but more broadly about what we need to do to make sure that everyone in this country has access to opportunity. Just yesterday, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. President Johnson said during his State of the Union in 1964, "Unfortunately, many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, some because of their poverty and some because of their color, and all too many because of both. Our task is to help replace their despair with opportunity. This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. It will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. But we shall not rest until that war is won. The richest nation on earth can afford to win it. We cannot afford to lose it." Those are the words of President Johnson 50 years ago when we started the war on poverty in this country. We created Medicare and Medicaid, the food stamp program, and programs like Head Start. And we have great results from those programs. In fact, according to a new study, these initial programs, coupled with the expansion of pro-work and pro-family programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, have helped reduce poverty by nearly 40% since the 1960s. And the poverty line fell from 26% in 1967 to 16% in 2012, when the safety net is taken into account. Now, while there's been a lot of progress, we still have far too many people in this country who are still living in poverty or on the brink of living in poverty. 15% of Americans today are living below the poverty line, and that's just $11,490 for an individual. 46.5 million people in our country are living in poverty, and 1 in 3 Americans teeters on the brink of living in poverty. That includes 16 million children in this country. That's more than 700,000 people in my home state of Wisconsin. And according to the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, in Rock County in my district, a county that I share with Congressman Paul Ryan, 22% of the children in that county are living in poverty. We still have vast inequality, income inequality. We have unlivable wages. And we still have members of this body, Mr. Speaker, who want to chip away at that very economic security. It almost seems like today it's not a war on poverty, but sometimes it seems like there's a war on the war on poverty, that we're actually stepping backwards from the very improvements we made over the years from 1960. In fact, what we noticed that just happened was the not extending of the benefits, unemployment emergency benefits, back in December, on December 28th. It's affected 1.3 million Americans. Not only do we have issues like that, but we also have an attack on food stamps, where this very body has voted to cut $39 billion from the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. $39 billion affecting millions and millions of Americans. We've seen attempts to not allow us to raise the minimum wage, a minimum wage that's entirely behind where it should be. If you took into consideration where it should be just for inflation from 1968, that minimum wage in 2013 dollars would be at $10.60, not $7.25. At $10.60. We're way behind keeping up with inflation. And income inequality is at an all-time high. We are finding that incomes for the top 1% have grown more than 31% since 2009, and the bottom 99% of people, their income has moved less than 1%. So we're at a challenging time. We know that there was an economic downfall across the globe, and especially hard hit, we feel it in this country. And while we're having a dual activities happen, jobs are creeping back up. We're having progress, but still 7% of people are unemployed. And while we've got those jobs creeping up, we still also notice that people are being left behind with this economy, and that's exactly why we have tried to do things like extending the unemployment insurance benefits for people. But unfortunately, in this very body, Mr. Speaker, austerity has ruled the day. Austerity has taken place instead of prosperity. Instead of doing measures that would lift people out of poverty and help people get a job and help people be able to support their families, we're trying to take government down and down and down like they did in Europe. And they've had disastrous results from doing that. That's not a path out of our current economic condition. We need to be investing in our people so that they have those opportunities. They can grab a ring at that ladder and get a good job and be able to get by. So there are so many things we need to do. And unfortunately, these attacks aren't just in this body, in the Congress. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, these attacks are even happening in the states. In my home state of Wisconsin, our governor, Scott Walker, was recently on a CNN program. And when he was asked about extending unemployment benefits, his response was, the reason why the White House is so actively pursuing this unemployment insurance is they want to desperately talk about anything but Obamacare. Can you believe the governor of a state who's 37th in job creation, who promised when he was elected to create 250,000 jobs, and he's done a portion of that, is somehow trying to say that helping people to get out of poverty, helping people to be able to support their family with groceries and to be able to pay their rent or mortgage at a time of still having record people who are out of work while we're trying to start getting jobs coming back at 7%. At that time, Mr. Speaker, that governor can still only talk about Obamacare, as all too often this body has done. We need to act now. The time to act on this for this body is now. 1.3 million people are currently out of work and trying to get those benefits they need so desperately during that period that have been cut off. And every week across the country, 72,000 new Americans will lose their benefits if we don't do something. 72,000 people across the country. Mr. Speaker, in our Speaker of the House's district alone, when you look at the largest cities in that district in Ohio, Springfield, Ohio, 60,000 people. That'd be like having your entire city of Springfield go unemployed in a single week. In the city of Hamilton, 62,000 people, 1 week, all out of work. Middleton, 48,000 people. You can take that in the surrounding communities, all in 1 week, out of work if we don't do something. That's why, Mr. Speaker, it's imperative that this body do something. 1.3 million Americans have lost these benefits at the end of December, including 20,000 military veterans who aren't getting the benefits they need. These are hardworking people who are still trying to find jobs in this economy, but there's just not enough jobs yet available. And in many fields, it's even tougher. Right now, 24,000 Wisconsinites have lost these important vital lifelines. And the number just keeps going up every single week by 72,000 people. And yet, Mr. Speaker, the House Republicans adjourned Congress on December 12th, more than 2 weeks before these benefits were set to expire. We could have done something. We could have stayed and worked, and instead we didn't. And now, because of that, we have 1.3 million and counting people who don't have access to these vital benefits. Now, let's just think about this. Under President Bush, 5 times we extended these benefits without any strings attached, like this Congress is trying to do to this president, 5 times, and the unemployment was less than the 7% we're at right now. It is hypocritical for us not to do what we all did together 5 times under President Bush while people are still looking for work. The bottom line is you still need this funding, not just to pay for groceries and to pay for rent or your mortgage, but you need things to be able to get a job. If you don't have the ability to pay for gas in your car, how are you going to be able to find a job? You need to be able to have that car to go to interviews to find a job. You need to be able to pay for your phone so that you can get a phone call for these jobs. These are all things that we need to make sure those benefits are available for all too many people in this country. There's also what happens to the economy when you don't have these benefits in place. And just in the first week since Congress cut off long-term unemployment, our local economies across America lost $400 million in potential economic activity, and that's going to grow every single week. So it's a double whammy. Not only are people who are looking for work, desperately looking for work, trying to find that job, not able to find that job, but we're also going to have even more people be unemployed because of the overall impact that has on the economy. It is said that 200,000 jobs will be lost in 2014, and we're going to decrease the gross domestic product simply by not doing these benefits. The bottom line is there are so many reasons why we need to do this, and I'm going to talk more about my state of Wisconsin and why it's important. But I am joined by one of my colleagues here today, who is actually the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Raul Grijalva. Representative Grijalva has served in Congress for 6 terms. He's a member of the Committee on Education and Workforce, and he also serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, where he is the ranking member on the National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands Subcommittee. He is a tremendous member of Congress. He's been a mentor to many of us who are freshmen who recently have joined, and a very strong member of our Progressive Caucus, speaking on behalf of each and every American who needs opportunity. It is my pleasure to yield some time to Representative Grijalva.
Thank you, Congressman, and let me at the outset thank you for these opportunities to provide some clarity to the discussion and the lack of debate many times in this House about what's really important for the American people. That clarity is important to this whole Congress, important specifically to our Democrats, and in particular to the Progressive Caucus, of which you are a member. And we want to thank you for that and for the effort. You know, the Federal Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program expired on the 28th because of lack of action on the part of the majority being the Republicans, cutting off an average weekly benefit of $300,000, as was been stated, to 1.3 million job seekers. Without that extension, another 72,000 Americans on the average are estimated to lose their unemployment insurance every week during the first half of this new year. All economists agree that provided extended employment benefits is one of the most effective job creation strategies available during a high period of joblessness and in this period of economic uncertainty. Every dollar of unemployment compensation creates 52 cents in additional economic activity beyond that dollar. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that extending benefits for another year will save 200,000 jobs. The failure by the Republicans to extend federal employment insurance at the end of last week is already taking more than $400 million out of the pockets of American job seekers nationwide and state economies. Unemployment insurance is viewed as a very effective stimulus because Americans without jobs tend to spend their unemployment insurance right away and on the very basic needs that they and their families need. Democrats have called on Congress to extend federal emergency unemployment insurance program through 2014. Congress must act soon to restore those necessary benefits to the unemployed workers and to their families. This economy still has 1 million fewer jobs than before the Great Recession began. 37% of the unemployed have been out of work for more than 6 months. Almost 1.9 million more would lose their unemployment benefits in the first half of 2014 as their state benefits run out. In my state of Arizona, the failure by the GOP, the Republicans, to reinstate and extend the unemployment compensation benefits affected directly 17,100 unemployed workers in Arizona. And an additional 22,500 unemployed workers will lose their benefit in the first 6 months of 2014 if this Congress does not act. Arizona has an average 8.3 unemployment rate throughout the state. And with that, and less than 20% less in employment benefits to these workers as we speak. So we stand a chance in Arizona to save up to 2,000 jobs, reinstate for 17,000 people their employment benefits if this Congress were to act now. We're here today, and Mr. Pocan in managing this hour, to talk about the necessity and the urgency of the extension of unemployment benefits that has to be a priority for this Congress. For those willing workers and their families, it is an essential act by this Congress. And these families and these workers should not be political pawns in a political gamemanship or got-you strategies by the Republicans to try to affect and embarrass the president. That does not need to be part of this equation. As Mr. Pocan pointed out, this has been dealt in a bipartisan. This renewal has always, regardless of who's in the White House, has been a response to the needs of the American people and their workers. But I also believe that nor should they be subjected to punitive, mean-spirited requirements in order to receive that support. We need action. We don't need posturing. We don't need empty preaching from the majority on extended unemployment benefits. That needs to be done, and done immediately. And as we talk about unemployment benefits and their extension, I also want to mention that we have to realize that there's not a subtle or overly covert agenda at work here by the majority. We see the non-action on unemployment, a vital and necessary response that in the past has met with bipartisan support. We now see cuts amounting to $20 billion in nutrition and basic sustenance support for people in need, the SNAP program in the Farm Bill. That cumulative effect of $20 billion will affect many, many families, children, and adults throughout this country. There is also a growing wage and income inequality and disparity in this country. That has been as a consequence of policies in which we reward those that are doing well, and God bless them, and they should do well, and we should be proud of them. We reward them with tax breaks, with loopholes, and with the ability to increase their income and their purchasing power, while at the same time shifting the burden of responsibility for basic services in this country to hardworking middle-class people in this country. That income inequality is possibly one of the most dangerous economic realities that's happening to this nation, and that too is an agenda that is going on and continues to go on in the policies and the initiatives that are being promoted by the majority party in this House. There's a huge need in this country for a livable minimum wage that pays people for the actual work that they do. And we can't ignore the sequester cuts and how they have directly affected child care and the ability for parents, and particularly women, to be able to work and have some security that their children are being taken care of. The cuts in that area, in Head Start in particular, are going to be devastating. Early childhood education, the cuts in that area. and the freedom that it would provide parents to be able to feel secure about being at work while their children are learning and being taken care of. The cuts in job training and the ability for people to seek new careers and change the orientation of where they're working, that has been cut. Public education, an investment strategy that in economic times has been critical to our country, again being cut. Access and affordability to higher education, again being cut. And there's been no jobs bill. It was interesting to hear the Speaker of the House say the other day that it is the Democrats' fault that there is no job agenda that's been presented. There has been a job agenda presented over and over again by a variety of colleagues in this House, in the Senate, and by the administration. The inaction and the turning your face to that reality has been the consequence of the leadership in this House that have refused to deal with that. And unemployment benefits are part of a greater crisis, a crisis of economic fairness in this country, a crisis that demands that this Congress look beyond its own rhetoric and look at the reality. In my district, every time in our office people come in seeking help from us, and invariably the biggest request is, how can I find a job? How can I get trained for a new career? How can I get myself in a situation where I can go back to work and feel secure and taken care of and supporting my family? And single head of households, the same issue. And I would suggest that if we really want to deal with the economics and not just provide rhetoric about jobs, that we look at the first necessary step, extend these unemployment benefits, provide some security and some sustainability to millions of workers in this country, and then move on to the real agenda, which is to provide some fairness to these workers and some opportunity to this worker. Again, Congressman Buchanan, let me thank you, and I appreciate the time. Yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Grijalva, and thank you for so articulately outlining the austerity policy of the House Republican leadership and their stunning lack of ability to get anything done to help people, the 1.3 million people who are out of work and the 72,000 Americans each and every week that are going to lose their benefits if this House doesn't act. It's now my pleasure to introduce a stalwart progressive in U.S. Congress, the ranking member of the House Committee on Financial Services, as well as a member of the House Steering and Policy Committee. She's a member of our Congressional Progressive Caucus and a past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. It's my honor to yield some time to Representative Maxine Waters.
Thank you very much. I'd certainly like to thank the gentleman from Wisconsin's Representative Mark Pocan for his time, and I congratulate him for organizing this Congressional Progressive Caucus special order on unemployment insurance. 50 years ago this week, in his State of the Union address, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared a war on poverty. He introduced federal legislation, even proposed state initiatives that would, over the time, improve health, education, nutrition, and access to housing, employment, and economic opportunities. Although America has changed a great deal since that day, poverty and economic inequality are still at the forefront of our nation's problems. And they are only exacerbated by the Great Recession. The gap between the rich and poor in America has become a chasm. Today, 20% of the income in our country goes to the top 1% of Americans, and the top 1% holds about 40% of the country's wealth. This inequality is mirrored in our communities, our housing and rental markets, and our financial system, where a lack of access to banking services often causes working families to have debts that spiral out of control. Mr. Speaker, inequality in this country has reached a point that for many, the American dream of upward mobility and unlimited economic opportunity has been greatly diminished. The 2008 financial crisis cost our economy $12 trillion as millions lost their homes and jobs. This destruction of wealth disproportionately hurt our nation's most vulnerable and only widened the gap between the rich and the poor. Even the gains from growth during the recent recovery has overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest people in society. Almost 95% of the income gains since the recovery began have been captured by the top 1%. Meanwhile, the minimum wage has not been increased since 2009. Mr. Speaker, this is totally unacceptable. Chronic unemployment and poverty still plague many of our communities. American families are still struggling to make ends meet. 4 million Americans have been out of work for 27 weeks or more, and the economy still has 1 million fewer jobs than before the Great Recession began. Though there are other factors at play, much of this inequality is a result of some of the government policies that we make. And government policy can help reverse these alarming trends. But instead, our friends on the opposite side of the aisle are digging us deeper and deeper into this crisis. They passed a farm bill that cuts SNAP nutrition program for low-income families by $40 billion. And then the Republicans let unemployment insurance for the long-term unemployment expire 3 days after Christmas. Already, 1.3 million unemployed Americans have lost their federal unemployment insurance. That includes 20,000 military veterans. And each day this program sits expired, thousands of additional struggling Americans are adversely affected. As state benefits are exhausted in the first 6 months of 2014, an additional 1.9 million Americans will lose their unemployment insurance. In fact, every week, another 72,000 job seekers will lose their benefits during the first half of this year. Mr. Speaker, unemployment insurance is critical for struggling families. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, unemployment insurance kept 2.5 million people above the poverty line in 2012, including 600,000 children. Unemployment insurance is good for the economy. According to Moody's Analytics, every dollar of unemployment insurance generates $1.55 in new economic activity in the first year. The Bipartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that 200,000 jobs could be lost in our economy if unemployment insurance is not extended. We must act and act immediately to extend unemployment insurance. So I call on my Republican colleagues to bring the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Extension Act, that is H.R. 3824, to the House floor and pass it now. With 1 in 5 American children living in poverty, it is clear that the war on poverty has gone on for far too long. Let's take action now to help all Americans share in our nation's growth and prosperity. Let's bring an unemployment insurance extension bill to the floor, and let's bring it now. Let's bring a substantive jobs bill to the floor now, and let's bring a minimum wage increase to the floor now. American families have suffered enough. It's time to restore the American dream. And as I wrap up, let me just say this on behalf of the American people. I hear these arguments every day from the opposite side of the aisle of saying, if you continue to extend these unemployment benefits, you're simply going to undermine the will for people to go to work. What you're going to do is make them comfortable on these unemployment benefits, and they won't go look for a job. Well, I want to tell you, I have not talked to everyone who's unemployment or who needs extended benefits, but I can tell you this. American folks want jobs. They want to work. They want to earn a decent living. They want to earn wages to take care of their families and their children. Their aspirations and their goals are the same as yours and mine. They want what America has promised. And I would say to those who would continue this argument, don't disrespect the American people that way. Don't undermine the American people that way. Do what you know is right, what makes good sense, and let us help out those who are the most vulnerable, who need us now at this time, so that they can continue to look for jobs, so that they continue to aspire to have the American dream. And I yield back the balance of my time, and thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Representative Waters. Your efforts over the years have been so appreciated by so many, and I hope the House Republican leadership will listen to your pleas and bring this to a vote. It's now my honor to introduce one of my fellow freshmen who has rapidly been recognized not only for his hard work and effort, but for his skills and his work on behalf of so many across this country. I would like to yield some time to my colleague, Representative Jeffries.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin, the Badger State, for his continued leadership, and each and every week when we're in session coming to the floor of the House of Representatives and articulating the progressive message for all to hear and for the good of the country. And I appreciate you yielding some time during this Congressional Progressive Caucus Special Order. This month we marked the 50th anniversary of the declaration of the War on Poverty. We know that on January 8, 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson came to this very chamber, spoke to a joint session of Congress, and laid out a series of initiatives designed to combat chronic poverty in this country. As a result of this effort, there were many legislative battles that were won in the march toward the creation of a great society. Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, school breakfast program, the Food Stamp Act, minimum wage enhancement, Job Corps, college work study. These were programs all part of that great society era enacted between 1964 and 1966, and taken together with other War on Poverty initiatives, they managed to rescue millions and millions of Americans from their impoverished condition and set them on a pathway toward the middle class. And over the years, we've attempted to continue that war on poverty with great success, such that the situation in America now is better than it was in 1964. Yet we know that the war continues. But instead, it seems like, as opposed to waging a war on poverty here in this chamber, many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have decided to embark on a war against the poor, a war against middle-class families and senior citizens, those who are striving to realize the full potential of the American dream. And that's why we're all so troubled by the failure to extend long-term unemployment benefits. Now, I arrived in this chamber feeling as if I was prepared for the experience, given the professional and educational legislative experiences that I had had in advance of January 3rd of 2013, and it's been my honor and my privilege to work with such a tremendous class of freshmen. But I've been troubled over the last year by the fact that I appeared deficient in one area, and that's in my failure to have any meaningful experience in the art of hostage negotiation. But from the very beginning that I set forth in this chamber, it seemed as if those skills were necessary in this climate. In January of 2013, we had to wait more than 75 days before this House would pass a Superstorm Sandy relief package unprecedented in the history of this Congress's response to a natural disaster, because there were some who put forth a ransom note demanding offsets, even though never had that happened in the history of the Republic. And then several months later, in the run-up to October 1st, you had an Affordable Care Act law passed by this Congress in 2010, signed by the President, declared constitutional by the Supreme Court in an opinion parenthetically written by Chief Justice John Roberts, and then reaffirmed with the overwhelming Electoral College election of the President in 2012. But notwithstanding any of that, you had folks demanding, in exchange for keeping the government open, that we either delay, destroy, or defund the Affordable Care Act. Again, a ransom note exercise. But here we are, 1 year removed from my inaugural experience around the Superstorm Sandy debacle, back again, facing an almost unprecedented situation where the majority has said, in exchange for us renewing long-term unemployment benefits for Americans that reasonable people should conclude are in need, not only do we want a pay-for, almost unprecedented, the last 17 times that this has been extended, but we've got a whole list of ransom demands that we want enacted in order for us to rescue these Americans who are in distress. I'm just hopeful, Mr. Speaker, that we can get together subsequent to the United States Senate, which has signaled and indicated its willingness to move forward. See to it that it shouldn't be the case that in exchange for taking a positive step forward in this institution, we always have to take 2 steps backward. The positive step would simply be to renew the provision of unemployment benefits for the long-term individuals who have been working hard to find a job, and then coming together to figure out collectively how we can all move forward in the best interests of this country and our economy. I'm hopeful that that will take place in the next day or week, certainly within the month, and we'll continue to press forward in that regard. And with that, I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for his continued leadership, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Representative Jeffries, and thank you for articulating, I guess, what I've been feeling also for the last year, my lack of hostage-taking skills. But I've certainly learned some in the last 12 months serving in this body. It is now my pleasure to yield some time to my colleague from California, who was the first Mexican-American woman to be elected to Congress. She co-founded the Bipartisan Congressional Study Committee on Public Health. She became the first woman to chair the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and serves as the chairwoman of their Health Care Task Force. It's an honor to yield some time to Representative Lucille Roybal-Allard.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to commend the Congressman Pocan for his leadership and his hard work on this very, very important issue. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the 1.4 million Americans who lost their emergency unemployment insurance during the holiday season, and the millions of Americans who stand to lose their benefits in 2014 if Congress fails to extend unemployment insurance. It is an insult to the American worker to oppose the extension of these benefits on the premise that emergency unemployment insurance provides a disincentive to work, and that it makes unemployed Americans content to live off of the taxpayer-supported benefits. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that Americans have a strong work ethic and are the best and most productive in the world. And the reality is that in spite of their efforts to find employment, there are still 1.3 million fewer jobs today than there were when many of these Americans lost their jobs due to our country's economic downturn. It is unconscionable to punish those who lost their job through no fault of their own and continue to actively seek work. With nearly 3 job seekers for every available position, American workers are unemployed not because they are not motivated to work, but because there are simply not enough jobs for everyone who needs one. This problem is magnified in my home state of California, where there are 400,000 fewer jobs available today than there were 6 years ago. Unemployment benefits average $300 per week and replace less than 50% of prior earnings. Yet these benefits can make the difference between homelessness and hunger. They are often the only means of keeping a roof over one's head and putting food on the family table. For example, in 2012, unemployment benefits kept an estimated 2.5 million Americans, including 600,000 children, out of poverty. It is also worth noting that unemployment benefits do more than provide a critical lifeline for out-of-work Americans. It is estimated that each dollar of unemployment insurance generates $1.50 in new economic activity. This means our economy is losing $400 million every week Congress refuses to extend these benefits. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office also estimates that the economy will lose 200,000 jobs if emergency unemployment insurance is not extended. Unemployment insurance is a moral imperative that will also keep our economic recovery moving in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, we are a country of hard-working Americans. We must not turn our backs on those who need this critical federal assistance as they struggle to find work. I strongly urge Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor to schedule floor action on extending emergency unemployment insurance benefits without delay. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much. And it's just so important to note that about 37% of the people who receive these benefits have been searching for a job over 6 months. The very people that are going to be affected, 72,000 a week if this House doesn't act. So thank you so much.